welcome to our Money Talk Tuesday. This week's topic is a conversation on pay equity in the time of COVID, presented by AAUW and the Office of Economic Empowerment. This is our quick little agenda. We're going to go over what about the Office of Economic Empowerment, any disclosures we have, some housekeeping, and then we'll introduce our speaker of the day. Really quickly, the Office of Economic Empowerment is a department within the Office of the Treasurer and Receiver General of Massachusetts. We're tasked with supporting, advocating, and facilitating policies that empower all Massachusetts residents. Our programs serve women, families, high school students, veterans, and seniors. Our priorities include closing the wage gap, increasing access to financial education, improving college affordability, and investing in STEM careers and education. Just for our disclosure, this is a Zoom webinar and will be recorded. The recording may be uploaded onto a public website for future use. And this webinar is also being streamed live on Facebook, on the OEE, which is the Office of Economic Empowerment's Facebook page. And any information shared through the question functions will be anonymous. Please note, however, the chat record is subject to public record laws and as such, not anonymous. For some quick housekeeping, this is a webinar again. It's not a meeting, so you won't be able to see everybody. And the host can call on participants, meaning myself, I can call on participants, but we're gonna limit it to our question and answer app and our chat functions. You can communicate to the host and the panelists that way. The Q&A will be available throughout the webinar. I am gonna encourage you, if you came with questions, you can go ahead and submit them and we'll get to them at the end of our webinar. And then we'll also be having exit poll pop up at the end. If you can't stay, the link will pop up when you exit this webinar, so feel free to use the survey or the exit poll. You do not have to do both. And just last minute, thank you. And these are our social media. If you find us on Twitter, it's Empowerment MA, Economic Empowerment MA on Facebook, and then AAUW on Twitter, AAUW.national on Facebook. And they also have an Instagram, which we didn't post on here, but that's at AAUW as well. And without further ado, this is our lovely speaker, Kimberly Churches. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Association of University Women. And welcome.
Thank you. So great to be with you today.
Thank you for coming. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our questions then. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and AAUW's work around economic security for women and girls?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I have to say we're so thrilled with our longstanding partnership with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as with Mayor Walsh in the city of Boston. But AAUW has been around a long time in this fight, really to advance gender equity for all women and girls in the U.S. as they pursue education, as they pursue their careers and their life in society, leadership roles, and retirement. So we are primarily tasked with, I'm sitting here in my dining room in Washington, D.C., and while I reside in our nation's capital, I'm one of those fierce supporter of facts. So as an organization here based in Washington, D.C., we first and foremost like to analyze and research the facts, and from the research and analysis put forth ideas for policy change as well as for pragmatic action. Because we know that even as we advocate with our 170,000 members and supporters in every congressional district, whether you reside in a red, blue, or purple state in the US, we know that policy change in and of itself is not going to get everything done, that we actually have to ensure changes are being implemented on the ground in our educational sectors, in our workplaces, and in society. So that's a little bit about AAUW, and I came to AAUW from a policy and academic background and joined about 3 years ago, and I've been delighted to be in this fight, and I can tell you that it has only gotten more interesting over these past 3 years, from the inauguration of Donald Trump in January of 2017 to the Me Too movement, as well as what we've just seen in these, what feels like 14 months, but has really only been about 3.5 months of this extraordinary health pandemic, the extreme losses of more than 45 million jobs in the United States, such a deep crash on our economy, as well as the centuries-old need for reckoning of racial equity in this country, that I feel more inspired and more passionate and dedicated to our work now more than ever.
Thank you. It sounds pretty obvious, but why isn't equal pay the law of the land? What are some roadblocks?
Great question, and sadly, it is the law of the land. John F. Kennedy passed the Equal Pay Act in 1963, so just imagine me with a pillbox hat on and a Jackie O purse in my hands. But you know, the world has changed a lot since 1963. We certainly also passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and yet look at how we're dealing with racism, discrimination, bias, and violence against people of color in this nation right now, and particularly for Black women, boys, girls, and men. And so as we think about pay equity, yes, it's the law of the land, but the workforce has changed dramatically since 1963. And as I said at the outset, a law in and of itself is not going to create human behavioral change. We have to hold our employers, our educators, our society to a higher standard of really ensuring that they're implementing and delivering on these promises. Further, I would say, you know, we've made some really tremendous efforts at the municipal and state level to really bolster on top of the Equal Pay Act some of the key things that are needed so that we can actually achieve and start to close that gap. Because, for example, in the past 2.5 decades, so almost 25 years, the pay gap has only budged by about a nickel. That means we're not doing enough on the ground to actually implement real change and to strengthen our existing laws. Up until this past year, there were 2 states in the United States that had 0 pay equity laws on the books, Alabama and Mississippi. Alabama did pass one. They passed some other laws that I'm not too thrilled about, but they did pass a pay equity bill, and they're actually advocating for additional ones. But Massachusetts, frankly, has been a leader in passing some very strong laws along with California and New York to ensure that everybody in our nation's economy and in the state's economies in which they reside can receive fair pay for equal work. And so some of those things are things like salary history bans. This is one of the easiest ways that women get dinged because we have a lot of opacity in what people are paid. When I first started in the workforce, just after when we entered the 1990s, you know, if you were offered a salary, you didn't even know you could negotiate. You just said thank you. And so you had no idea, even if you had the same level of educational background and experience as a male colleague. I learned that one of my earliest colleagues was earning $7,000 more than me in an entry-level job. That's significant when you're living on, you know, frozen peas and Uncle Ben's rice, just getting started in the workforce. So salary bans actually ensures that what I made at 22 years old doesn't impact me and stay with me over the course of my lifetime. Meaning if I was paid less then, and if my salary history is shared with a future employer, they might think that they can get me on the cheap. Right? So maybe if I was being paid 40, but another employee, another candidate for the job was paying 52, they might take me and say, oh, we'll offer her 45, and then we're going to get a savings on this. So that just really compounds over a woman's entire history. So some of these new laws are really to wrap around the Equal Pay Act to ensure that we're holding employers accountable, that we're asking them for transparency and regular pay audits so that we can actually start to close that gap that's just been stagnant for too long.
As you mentioned, Massachusetts has been a leader on policy change and around pay equity, but we still rank 15th among the states and have 17% gap for all women, not to mention it's worse for many women of color. What else should we focus on to close these persistent gaps?
Yeah, and honestly, that gap could widen right now just because what's different from 2008-2009's financial crisis to the COVID-19 health pandemic that led to an economic crisis. One is the 2008-2009, we actually saw more men impacted with lost jobs, but in COVID-19, we quickly saw more women. And really you had it over several months in 2008-2009, and it was, just that sheer drop that we've just watched over, about two months and then change into the third and now into the fourth month. So as we look at this, right now, just so everybody that's participating today has a sense of this, of the more than 45 million humans who've been furloughed and laid off during this crisis, overwhelmingly we're impacting women. A lot of that is due to the fact that women are on the front lines. We're the majority of healthcare workers. We're the majority of low wage work. We're the majority of part-time work. And a lot of that has frankly been essential work during this time. So they haven't had, fair scheduling to be able to handle childcare and elder care. They've been at risk of the virus throughout. And it's impacting lives, and it's really about the economic security of families. So, to your question, what should we be doing? One, I think, is, we do need additional legislative change. There are additional tools that we can do through policy to spur change. But I think most importantly right now is holding our educators, holding our employers in every sector, private, public, nonprofit, my sector as well. I'm in a nonprofit, but we have to have increased transparency. And why is that so important? All of us, if you're an employee, you get an employee handbook and you learn about the values of where you work, and it all seems terrific. Beautiful words, nouns, adjectives, and verbs on paper can feel inspiring and feel like your employers have your best interest. But hiring, retention, and promotion practices tend to be exceedingly opaque. Meaning that you don't really know how that's done and how pay is done. So around transparency, we just really feel that through the collection of data and sharing that, a lot of times companies and organizations might be thinking they're on the right path because perhaps they have more women in leadership represented roles. But when you dig into the pay from entry level on up to leadership roles, you see truly persistent gaps. And even in education, as you think about our nation's community colleges, four-year colleges and universities and R1 institutions, you really see that ceiling of where women butt up against where their higher pay can be, as well as the leadership roles. So I truly believe one is making sure we're being consistent and we're implementing on the laws that are already in place in Massachusetts, because you've done the good work to pass things at the municipal and state level, but you have to allow the time for implementation and really insist on that transparency and sharing around pay audits, salary bands, so the bands of starting salary to a total salary for, say, a coordinator or a manager or director or the like, and making sure they can look for those disparities in pay and share it and share their plan of action to solve it. I mentioned, retention and promotion practices. We also know that women face a lot of educational segregation and occupational segregation, meaning we're pushed into fields that have been kind of traditionally held by females. And even when we're going into higher ed, we're moved more into the social sciences and less into STEM work. And I'm really proud of your office, for spending so much time on STEM, because those are some of the highest paying jobs, available in our nation. I'd say, some other things as we're thinking about hourly workers, part-time workers, and the like that are overwhelmingly women, is, if this COVID-19 pandemic has showed us anything, it's that you can't imagine an elected or appointed official not understanding the need of paid sick leave, right? I mean, this health pandemic has just showed every single human in the workforce deserves paid sick leave. But sadly, as we return to work, only about 17% of the workforce has paid sick leave. So it's really in those higher ranking. And so that's a huge gap. So if you don't have paid sick leave, one, you have issues with childcare, you have issues with elder care, and you have issues with getting fair scheduling so that you can actually, it's hard for you to take time off if you're gonna lose pay. So that puts families at risk of being able to put food on their table and pay their electric bills. So those are some of the things that we need to be doing to make sure right now we can start to close those gaps. But I really can't emphasize enough the need for sunshine on these issues. Once we have audits, once we have transparency around hiring and promotion practices, we can see those disparities in the clear sunlight and really address the changes that are so sorely needed. Last, I'm going to make one more point, which I think is really important, because I've served on a lot of search committees over the years for sort of, entry-level, mid-level, and senior level employees in a lot of different organizations. And I think, as a nation and in a lot of our areas in the nation, we've done a very good job of making sure we have diverse pools, but it becomes much more of a check the box. Oh, great. We've got 2 people of color and we've got 3 women in this pool and 4 white guys. But for whatever reason, when you see that promotion, you still tend to see the white guy named John getting promoted into a role because he quote unquote fits the culture. So as we think about this, and this is really important, that this is why legislative action has to be paired with pragmatism and with real systemic change. Because the workplace we all work in was really created for the white male going to work 9 to 5, coming home to a roast chicken available from his wife, 2.2 kids and a golden retriever. And that's not the workforce today. Women make up half of the labor force, and the losses that we face by not achieving pay equity, real parity, where we're actually paid dollar for dollar, Fuji apple to Fuji apple, banana to banana, in whatever industry, is $935 billion a year. So don't think about that just in terms of your pocketbook. Think about what that would do for the economy in terms of spurring more consumer spending, tax rates, et cetera, to make our society better. And this also would lift 2.5 million children out of poverty.
That's a huge number. When you talk about it in the numbers like that, it can be impactful.
Yeah. And I'll say one more thing on that too, because, I think sometimes we talk in these huge numbers and it seems almost like overwhelming to even think about. But, just think about if you are an hourly worker, Black women, for example, tend to, over 80% of them are single parents with minor children under the age of 18 living at home. So let's say you were earning $12 an hour, but your male colleague is earning $14.50 an hour. And what that extra $2.50 can matter is it's a choice. And I heard this from a woman in Boston about a year ago who said, once I learned how to advocate for myself and how to demand fair pay on my hourly wage, I didn't have to make those decisions about what bills to pay that month. Just that cushion allowed me to better take care of my family. And so that's making it a really personal level, even as we talk about these really terrifying, huge numbers.
Right. We talked about the fact that, COVID, all these pressing emergencies. Why is it still important to advocate for pay equity at a time like this when everything's all over the place?
Yeah. This is tough. And we've been I'm really, really proud of how, as an organization, we've pivoted as well. And we used to do a lot of in-person workshops almost solely around salary negotiation. And it's not just about salary negotiation right now, right? And I've heard from a lot of people, and I say people because we offer a lot of our programs to women, non-binary, men, et cetera, because we want everybody to be a part of the inclusion and equity movement, particularly as we're thinking about the future of our economy and the future of our society. And it is important because you really do get, if you've been furloughed, anybody who's on today with us, if you've been furloughed or laid off, you might be hesitant because you just are looking to make sure you can pay your bills. But I would say to you, being armed with the data, being able to know what the average is for your zip code, for your geography, for your experience level, and being mindful of what the low end to high end there is, arms you with information that's not personal. It's not about you being nervous about it. It's data that shows what your value is in the marketplace. And if you're not advocating, again, you're having to negotiate with somebody else who they have their own biases, they've got their own discriminations and their ideas of how much your value is for. But without advocating for it, without ensuring that you're also not just talking about hourly wage or salary, but also other benefits such as paid sick leave, childcare benefits, public transportation vouchers, et cetera, you're leaving money on the table. And I would say, I do understand. I truly, truly do. I have a lot of friends, a lot of folks I know who've been furloughed and laid off. But if you have the opportunity to interview, it behooves you always to negotiate on these, because that's going to actually help to level the playing field, not just for yourself and your compounding wealth over the years, but it's also going to help your fellow Americans here who are all seeking to close this gap once and for all.
Can some of the fallout of this economic crisis be explained by our country's history of paying women and people of color inequitably?
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit. Like, you know, honestly, the way that we are set up for hiring and promotion, you know, women, when they become mothers, have an economic setback, because the thought is these prejudices, these old biases of keeping women at home and men in the workplace say, oh, gee, she's a mom. Great. Now that means she's going to be taking time off. If her kid has the sniffle, she'll have to handle, you know, the soccer games, etc. And men traditionally receive a fatherhood bonus, meaning once they become fathers, now they're stalwart and more respected, and he's a family guy. We're going to keep him around. So they actually receive a bump up where women bump down. A lot of this is, and even in, you know, higher level positions. So I'll use higher education and accounting as two examples. You know, if you've attained your PhD and you've completed all of your schooling and you decide to go into academia, typically once you enter and you want to hit tenure, because tenure is a big deal, you basically have about 7 years. And most humans achieve their PhD, depending on the topic, somewhere around 27 to 30 years old. Well, what's that time for women? It's prime baby making years, right? But if you've got 7 years to publish or perish to make sure you can stay on that tenure track, it means you've already been voted off the conveyor belt for that. And because you don't get to have those choices. Men, on the other hand, if they're not the ones having to carry the children, it's assumed their partner or spouse will help in that and they can stay on track. So in that example, I think it's just an archaic system around tenure that just needs to be modernized to the actual 21st century and not stuck in the 19th century when most women were not also adding to the economic security of their families. You know, likewise in accounting, if you enter as a junior accountant and you want to make partner in your firm, it really is in those prime baby making years. And a lot of times women do end up bearing the burden overwhelmingly of childcare and domestic work, and therefore get held back from those partner positions or the like. So these are systemic issues that we haven't addressed how and why we work. But you know, I know this all sounds depressing, so let me give you a little bit of sunshine on this so that we all don't just start our happy hour right now out of sheer depression. I think that it's important to say this pandemic has illuminated things for so many, including myself. You know, we had a pretty generous telework policy already for our employees. We have about 50 employees. And but we weren't allowing non-exempt, meaning hourly workers that weren't on salary, to work from home, primarily because of what Human Resources Standards showed us nationwide, and worrying that these terrific humans who work so hard could go over sort of their 40-hour work week or be taken advantage of, right? But we've really found during this pandemic, because we were forced to, that all humans, you know, when you're able to, frankly, 70% of our workforce is not able to work from home because of the type of work that they do. But for those of us that are privileged to do so, we really learned that if you give tasks, if you're flexible in your schedules, many of us have minor children or elders or really difficult situations at home. And so trying to work sort of that typical 8:30 to 5 is a little harder in these times because we're dealing with children and the like. But we found that with flexibility, by giving tasks and projects and deadlines, everybody can really telework much more dramatically. And so that's an opportunity for us to look at, let's turn the page and get past this pandemic. Maybe it'll be in 2021. How do we go back to work? We're not going to go back to the old normal. I don't think anybody, you know, on today's webinar would assume that. But what are those systemic changes we can together make in our society? And why? What questions can we ask of, well, why? Why is tenure that way? Or why are promotion practices that way? Or why does it matter if she took a year off to be a first-time mother for a year along with her partner? Why is it we still treat it like maternity leave and not parental leave that both parents should be? You know, why are we not addressing childcare policies differently and paid leave differently? I think this pandemic is really showcasing opportunities for us to really modernize how we work, why we work, and how people continue to move up, because it shouldn't have to be a ladder that only white men can move up. We can do this in a way that can actually help our economy, help our innovation, help us problem solve, and actually create a lot of ROI for our nation.
Thank you. What are some tangible actions people can take right now to put themselves in a better position moving forward? Thinking personal gain and advocating for policy change.
Yeah, that's great. You know, look, we're talking about the pay gap here, but I think, you know, some of the most important things we can do is exercising our vote. So I would say, you know, we are launching a true grassroots get out the vote and voting rights advocacy in every congressional district. And I would say, if there's anything we can do is really make sure you're informed of the issues, know who your candidates are at a local level, and certainly in the national election as we approach November 3rd, get out and vote and really push for others to get out and vote. Second is really knowing the laws in your area. And, you know, again, I laud Massachusetts. There's still work to be done. But I would say Massachusetts is a real leader in really making sure that you're moving forward with strong laws to protect all human beings in the workforce. But I think, you know, one thing that you can do is really ask some questions of HR or the like. So if you're in a private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector right now, say, hey, review your employee handbook on it. How does promotion practice work? You know, you can ask those questions. Say, are we doing, I know, you know, a big issue around pay equity is, you know, prohibiting people from talking about their salaries with each other. But that's usually how a lot of times folks find out. And you want to make sure that there's no retribution law on the books as well. So, you know, asking simple questions of how often does this company or organization do a pay audit? Do you do it annually? Do you do it every 5 years? What's happening in those gap years? How are you addressing? How do you fix those pay gaps? Are you doing that every 2 years, every 6 months? How are you addressing this around quality? And then asking some questions about culture. Because, you know, I think the other thing we're finding, you and I are on Zoom and we're two, you know, females here, but we're really finding, I did an interview, media interview a month or so ago, and I know it's shocking, but just as we find around an executive table in your boardroom, women's voices are not being heard as much as men's voices on Zoom. So if you're in a meeting, you know, with the Hollywood Squares and you've got 8 or 10 people up on your screen, we're finding already we're going back to old cultures where men are mansplaining and talking over women in meetings. And so some of the other things we can do around this, just on a very individual level, is own your voice. If you've got something important to share or a counter, make sure your face is being seen. Make sure you're on video. Make sure you're prepared with cogent points and ready so that your voice can be heard. Because far too often we think, well, there's already so many people talking, I'll just stand back. And the way forward is really to show your value and your worth and your expertise so you can make sure you can be heard. The other, I think, that's really important beyond the pay gap is preparing yourself for the changes in the workplace. If some of you are working from home currently already, is understanding, you know, you can do a leadership assessment of yourself and take a look at, if you have aspirations for more, take a look at some of the opportunities. You know, is it that you need to better understand financial management if you want to move up? If you need to better understand operations, if you need a better understanding of marketing, comms, maybe learning a new software program or the like, we've got an opportunity, because each day feels like it's, you know, still March 392, that we've got an opportunity here to work on ourselves as well. And so, you know, I've been doing a lot more deep reading myself, just because this has shifted the way I work as a CEO in so many ways, and making sure that I can lead first and foremost with compassion to my entire team and make sure I'm hearing them of what their needs are and their aspirations are. But those are a few really personal things, as well as sort of policy pragmatic things folks can do.
Awesome, thanks. And can you tell us a little bit more about AAUW's Work Smart program and its impact so far?
Yeah.
Any advice or tips from the Work Smart training that you can share, help our audience better advocate for themselves in the workplace?
Sure, super. So we have 2 programs around salary negotiation. It's particularly really to close the gap for women, and particularly for Black and brown women that face the biggest gaps in our nation around pay at every single level in every industry and sector. And so these programs were really developed to help you be armed with the facts, to help you be armed with how to know your value and how to present your value proposition, how to ask and demand the salary that you deserve, as well as to counter any biases, discriminations, or the like, because we always are hearing counters, you know, from the person with whom you are negotiating. We've had tremendous success. I'll give you a funny story on this. I just got remarried just before the world shut down with this pandemic, and my husband was looking for a new job at the end of 2019, just looking for a new opportunity. And I said, you know, you should really take our online course before you go into it. He's like, oh, I've negotiated salaries. I know how to do this. But he really did learn some new tips on how to actually achieve what you're aiming for, and make sure you're articulating it in a way that is not just about personal pronoun I, but as we, and how we are going to move forward with this company. And he ended up being able to net out more in salary and benefits. So, you know, that's a story of a brown male being able to achieve that. So what does this mean now for us? So how our success on Work Smart and Start Smart. Start Smart we offer for folks who are in community college and four-year institutions before they go ahead and negotiate for their very first job. And I can tell everybody here, I've told this story a million times, you know, my first job, when they said, and Kim, we're going to offer you the starting salary of, you know, $27,000, my entire negotiation was just, oh, thank you. That was it. I didn't do anything else. So because I didn't know I could, there was no class I had taken in high school or college to prepare me for that. So what we prepare you with is really a better understanding of the background behind the pay gap, what facts you need to know what your field and your level is garnering in the marketplace. Meaning it's not just about that single employer you're interviewing with. You know, it's also kind of aggregating all of the employers in that space to know where the market is driving. And so, you know, if you reside in Boston, the salaries are different than the salaries are in Miami, and Miami is different than St. Louis, and St. Louis is different, you know, than Los Angeles. And being prepared to know your market worth in your geography is really critical. And then really helping you to be able to state your case as to why you believe this is the salary that you should be receiving once you're at that negotiation phase. We have been doing them in person workshops in Massachusetts, as well as online now for a few years. And we've had great success nationwide. We're at about 200,000, almost 200,000 trained nationwide, but we've reached millions of men and women through Reach as well, just in learning about it. But the advantage of this during this crazy time that we're living in, where we're all in our UGG slippers and you're only seeing the upper half in Zoom, is you've got great opportunities for online learning. One, you know, we're offering a new program through our nascent equity network. So it's a group of kind of 21 to 40-year-olds that are in the workplace, interested in inclusion and equity, but also very much interested in professional development. So we're hosting weekly webinars on tips like how to get your resume seen, you know, how to network virtually because you're not able to come together in networking events. And then also around salary negotiation and negotiation in general, of how important negotiation skills in your entire life, whether you're, you know, buying an electric bike or you're negotiating who takes out the trash with your roommate. We all need negotiation skills. So even though we're not able to offer them in person right now for all of the obvious reasons, our Work Smart Online is available online. It's totally free. And we have a lot of our other saved webinars around career development and professional development available on that Equity Network page on our website too. And there's tons of other resources outside of AUW as well. I'm sure a lot of the folks on here are, you know, either learning urban gardening right now or cooking or something, and you're using YouTube and a lot of other resources. So take a look out there, but do also stay in touch, I know, with your office as well as with us, because we're trying to make sure that humans are armed with the facts and with the right tools so they can succeed in this economy, and we can finally close this pay gap and really make sure that our workforce is working well for everybody.
Thank you. I have some questions coming into the Q&A, but before we do that, I do want to say that we did partner with AAUW in Massachusetts, and we were providing the in-person salary negotiation workshops in partnership with the Women's Fund of Western Mass. And I had the opportunity to go to a couple of those, and the stories that come out of there are always like, wow, I'm not the only one that's thinking like that, or wow, I didn't know that I could do it, and to do it together, it's a whole different experience. So I'm gonna miss doing that for the next foreseeable future, I'll say, but definitely take advantage of the online curriculum, because I've heard a lot of good things about that as well.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. It's really flexible as well, so everybody knows. You may not, just because our worlds are mad. I mean, right now I have 2 dogs, a cat, a husband working here. I have a 12-year-old daughter who I'm trying to keep occupied when there's no summer camps, right? But it's weird. It's a weird time for all of us to be doing this. So don't be worried about, you can't devote all of the time, even if, our program online is about an hour, hour and a half, but you can do it at your leisure. Do 10 minutes here, do 15 minutes there. You don't have to sit at one spot, because it's really hard to do that right now with all of the other demands on our time.
Yeah. And something too that the Office of Economic Empowerment has a website called equalpayma.org. And you mentioned a pay audit, and there's some tools similar to that on that website. So if folks want to check it out, it's specific to Massachusetts, but it's a lot of useful tools. There's a calculator on there, and you can see how your industry and how your role may line up against national numbers. It's just a cool tool to check it out. So we do promote the salary negotiation workshops when we have them on that website as well. I'm going to go ahead and get into the Q&As that we started receiving. I'm afraid I don't know which order. Oh, okay, here we go. Somebody said, laws are great, but what about enforcement? How can we enforce the laws that are already in place?
Yeah, so, some of that, we've got the EEOC for that. We have, obviously, the Office of the Treasurer in Massachusetts. And I think we're really seeing that, I've been doing some work in New York and in California as well that have the most progressive laws on the books, those 2 states. And they're leading actually in the smallest amounts of the pay gap nationwide. But they too are struggling with implementation of making sure. So a lot of this is the accountability and demanding it with additional requests of it. And I think some of that is the enforcement side of this too, is shining a light on it. So you're going to see more scorecarding of how different industries are doing. You want to be in an industry that's an A, you don't want to be a C. You might have seen Citi, CITI, the big bank, about 2 years ago, their CEO came out and said, our pay audit is an atrocity, and I'm embarrassed by this, and here's what we're going to do about it, and made it public, because it really enforcement really starts from leadership. Change really happens there. And the reason we've slowed down so much is we haven't demanded leadership stand up for that. And that's going to come from, in the private industry, shareholders demanding it. You're seeing much bigger pushes towards diversity on boards in that way, and laws and bills in the making right now around that. But, I think on enforcement, it's going to take time. Anytime you pass a law, it's not an automatic, it's not like turning a light switch on and everything is solved. It takes time to make that change. I'd say, and this is something a lot of our colleagues are working on, because we've been doing a lot of programs really directly to help and empower women. But women still are entering a workforce that is filled with conscious, like explicit bias and discrimination, or sexism, sexual harassment, or worse, assault. We are faced, we have to kind of bristle and hold ourselves together. So I worry a bit that so much of what we do is work that really just empowers women, when frankly we need to be overturning the system. So I am aiming as an organization to try and do more programming directly to hiring managers, to HR offices, et cetera, so they can be armed with more pragmatic tools to upend this. We did this recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, with Dell, as in the computer company, where we came together and put together a really pragmatic and policy solutions for getting more women in technology, for example. And it was really looking at what's the playbook? How can we actually solve this big issue where there's huge attrition rates of women, meaning women are going into technology and then they're bagging out because they don't like the culture, and they're in a bromance and they're just not loving it and they got to get out. And so what are the things that we can be doing? So I think it's not just enforcement, it's actually changing human behavior. Certainly enforcement is important, but it's also changing human behavior and giving people the tools so we can improve our workplaces and live up to what the laws are aspiring for.
How does awareness, perceptions, and actions to counteract the salary gap differ in higher education?
So meaning I'm guessing they're meaning like in higher, how do we deal with these? So, you know, we started, our name even has a U in it for University Women, because back in the 1800s when the organization was getting started, you know, women just did not have as much access to all the degree programs. They were really pigeonholed. And so our effort was really to remove those roadblocks. And I think in higher education, I've worked in higher education. I believe in higher education. I still believe that it can be. I don't believe it is, but I think it can be a great equalizer in our society. But I think, frankly, in higher education, a lot of times they get a hall pass, just like our nation's nonprofit organizations get a hall pass because they're doing kind of quote unquote mission work and doing good work on behalf of all. And we haven't had enough transparency there, including in our state institutions, those that are funded actually by tax dollars. And I think that's a place where we should be really making sure, since it's our tax dollars also supporting those institutions, that they're not able to get a hall pass, and that we should demand that at their leadership levels, you know, at faculty and staff, et cetera, that they mirror the communities that they serve in terms of the pay and leadership gaps. Because it's not just the pay gap, it's also the leadership gap. And you still see a lot of, you know, white males in control and much fewer women in every single industry, including higher education. I think on higher education, the other big issue is student loan debt, which we haven't talked about, but I think it's particularly important right now, since maybe a lot of folks that are on here still are holding student loan debt. And if you've been furloughed or laid off, it can be really scary you know, we know the CARES Act is working on some of that, but it's not enough. We actually need to do more. And the saddest part about this is, while women earn more higher education degrees, community college, bachelor's degree, master's, you know, doctoral, medical, law degrees, we earn more than men and have for some time. We're earning more medical degrees now than ever before, but we are carrying 2/3 of the nation's student loan debt. So, but that's a disproportionate amount to how many people are in institutions. And Black women in particular are finishing their undereducation with far much debt. Now, couple that debt, a lot of that is because tuition rates have gone up over 103%, where earning levels in our own families has only gone up by about 14% over the same time period. So there's a big gap. It's like a giant alligator mouth. And as we think about this, you know, if you are thinking that, you know, getting a higher education degree is going to put you on the path to financial sustainability, but you've taken on more debt than your male colleagues, if you're entering right now as a class of 2020 into this insane economy, you know, you're at worries of not being able to pay that debt, nor even getting a good job. And then when you're negotiating for that job, we're still seeing that women with a college degree are earning less than their male colleagues with the exact same degree, exact same background. So we've got the pay gap. So you're saddled with student loan debt. You're saddled with the pay gap that follows you throughout. And then women are 70% less prepared for retirement than men, because that just compounds over time. So this issue that we're talking about today, and it's why I raised this once you raised higher education, is not just about the pay gap. It's just how we value women in our society and how we value women of color in our society. And we have some very, very, very hard work to do to close these gaps, because women are just saddled with this over decades and decades of their lives. And we should be able to fulfill on the American promise that education should lead to greater economic security, but sadly, it's just not for so many.
Oh, I thought I was on mute. Sorry about that. As a career coach working with recent college graduates, should we still encourage students to negotiate salary during COVID? How might we shift our messaging around salary negotiation?
So one, I always say, I mean, I know we call it salary negotiation. I think it's really important to say it's just about negotiation. You know, when I negotiate for any position, I'm not only negotiating on whatever my hourly or annual salary is, I'm also negotiating around culture, around flexible schedules, around healthcare costs, around transportation. You know, there's a lot of other things to negotiate around here. So I want to make really clear, certainly salary is important, but there's a lot of other benefits that we should be talking about in the negotiation process. So first and foremost, during this time, you must negotiate. I know it feels scarier right now, particularly I know for career coaches too, because the amount of applicants for one position has increased so much. And if you need tips on how to get noticed in that, you know, as I mentioned, there's a lot on LinkedIn. We hosted a couple programs around that of how to get noticed in a crowded in a crowded pool right now, so that you're not just one of many fish in the pond looking for food. But I think it's really critical, important that you're armed with the data and can go in, because I will also say not every industry has been hit by this pandemic. So let's get real. There are several organizations and companies and sectors that are actually doing quite well. So we don't need to undervalue our negotiation during that time. We need to make sure we're prepared and that we're valuing what we bring to the table.
There is now pressure to put aside gender inequities in the workplace and focus solely on race inequities. This viewer is asking for your thoughts.
Yeah. So this is a terrific question. So I'm a white female leading an organization where our staff is now minority white. I'm very, very proud of that. But I would say we have worked, you know, our vision statement is equity for all, but when it's so broad like that, you can leave so many behind. So I will say we wrote our strategic plan 2 years ago. We've been iterating. It's a dynamic document. We've been working on it for several months. And actually in January and February, we were saying we actually have to bolster racial equity up front in these goals and objectives in much more quantifiable ways and qualitative ways. And what does that look like? So for example, we're going to be doubling down on a lot more research and programs in STEM and really disaggregating STEM to those areas where women are still really falling behind. Women are entering more engineering fields, yet the attrition rates are really high. Women are entering, you know, more mathematics and biological sciences, but still are facing a pay gap, et cetera. But as we're doing it, we're really going to focus on Black women first and how we can make sure we're not just encouraging them to go into those fields, but how can we remove some of the barriers? What are the programs that could be done on both sides and collectively? What are the allyship programs that we can be building? You know, how can we encourage humans to be better upstanders instead of bystanders to typically bias and discrimination that we see every day in our society? How can we get people to stand up and say, wait a minute, John, before you make that comment, my colleague Bonnie has been trying to get in on that Zoom call to share her points. Let's make sure we hear from Bonnie. When I'm leading a meeting now, I'm being very deliberate about whomever I'm talking with to make sure I'm getting the views of different thoughts here, because that's actually going to help us make different decisions. So for us at AAUW, I can tell you, and I know we have a ton of work to do here too, because we've been envisioning a world where we can, you know, really achieve equity for all women and girls. But until we actually really focus on girls and women of color and wrestle with these injustices and the violence and the bias and discrimination and racism for centuries, we're not going to be able to achieve equity for all unless we actually focus right now on what we can be doing for Black and brown women and girls.
Thank you. Are there any strategies for asking your company to complete a pay audit by gender, race, and ethnicity? And has there been any success in starting a grassroots audit in, say, a Google spreadsheet, even if it's anonymous?
Yeah, that can be tough because that's self-reported. So I'll tell you, LinkedIn has some of the best data out there because they've got, I don't know, something like almost 700 million users. And so you can get, they have a salary project on their website too. And oh, by the way, for everybody, you know, you can tell I haven't been to the hairdresser yet. I'm seeing all these grays popping up on my video screen here today. But I'd say, you know, the grassroots ones, the problem is bad data in, bad data out. You want to have accuracy there. I think for those of you on today's webinar who work for larger employers, you might have employee resource groups or business resource groups, ERGs, BRGs within your units. You might have, say, a women's network or a veterans network or an LGBTQ UIA network. And I really encourage those organizations that have larger groups where you can kind of come together with shared backgrounds or interests to really push for those together. Because when you're one voice, it's much harder to lead change around pay audits and the like. But if it's coming from a collection of people and your voices are being heard more by leadership, you can create more change. And I'd honestly say one of the big issues right now for ERGs and BRGs is they too have been working in silos. And, you know, if you are a Black lesbian woman, you could be in two different networks, but they may not be talking to each other. And so how do you come together with a shared agenda to take to leadership of what your demands are around inclusion, equity, hiring, and promotion? And a lot of that comes down to the basic good old pay audit. Sadly, you know, a lot of organizations are doing pay audits. I mean, the work is being done. It's just that they're not sharing it. And without sharing it, you can hide a lot of bad things. And so I think the biggest demand is making sure it becomes public. And I'm really proud of a lot of organizations and companies that are getting brave on that and sharing the work that they need to do to make it better so that all can thrive in their industries.
We got a question about the workshops you guys have. Do they address ageism when searching for a job and enduring salary?
When so we typically have a topic when we're doing these, and it's underneath on our website, AAUW.org, and you'll just go to the Equity Network page, Equity Network. And so we're offering basically weekly webinars on a variety of topics. We started on doing things on advocacy and the like, but in every time, just as we use this Q&A box and all of them are taped, a lot of questions come up. You know, I have heard ageism, I've heard, you know, women, I've had a lot of women write to me saying, I took 10 years off because my partner got a big promotion and we had some issues and I had to take care of my aging parents and my kids for a while, but I'm ready to go back in. I'm fully skilled still. How do I make sure my resume is seen? How do I overcome, you know, being a woman over the age of 50, re-entering the workforce? That's a huge deal. And this is about bias and discrimination, right? So it's how you present yourself. And we give some tips in the resume building and cover letter section on how to use dates and information around, you know, action verbs and the like. One of the biggest things that I can say on that is just talking about what you're looking for in real quantifiable and qualitative ways, and your own personal work ethic and commitment to the work. That can overcome a lot. That said, again, EEOC, if you do feel that you have an actual case for ageism or sexism or worse, we do have that agency available, and they 24 hours a day can take your calls anonymously until you're ready to potentially take any action.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question before we do our exit poll, and I think that this is a good segue to that. How can people support AAUW's work in closing the gender pay gap?
Oh, that's great. One, know your worth. Take WorkSmart online. It's available on our website. Two, become a part of our equity network, and you can do that really easily. You can become an e-advocate. We offer a 2-minute activist program where literally just like so many things that you get a ding on your cell phone and say, take action right now, to call your elected officials and demand action on these issues. Because the only way forward here is if we're armed with the facts, we demand the policy change, and then we demand the societal change. That's how real things move forward. But you actually have a voice, because I hope to goodness you're all registered voters. And if you're not, make sure and double check that and get registered immediately. This is your voice, your vote for sure. So that's an easy way to do it that doesn't, you know, cost a dime. We are a nonprofit organization, obviously, so we rely on the support of our members, of our corporate and foundation funders, and from folks in the Equity Network, but all of our programs are available for free. This is about access and preparing people for the future, whether that's in education, their family's economic security while they're in the workplace, and later into retirement and beyond. And so, you know, we really hope you can engage in those ways with us and check out some of our past webinars we've been doing since the first week of the pandemic that are all available online.
Thank you, Kimberly. I will also share that the Office of Economic Empowerment has our 83 Voices campaign, where we're collecting stories of personal experiences from anonymous Massachusetts residents of pay inequity in the workplace. We do have a form stack, which will get dropped into the chat, but also in any follow-up emails, we'll share that link in case anybody has a story that they would like to share. It would be helpful to us to share it because it can help somebody else in a similar position. It can help people who are going into the workforce, who are going to negotiate their salary, their benefits, anything that they think that they deserve. So we are collecting those stories as an office. And like I said, we do have the Equal Pay MA website that we have all those tools. And of course, Alex from AAUW had dropped a bunch of your AAUW links, including the link to donate, link to 2-minute advocating, and the Work Smart online courses.
And also, sorry for interrupting, but you can also join as a member too. So we offer, local branches in communities. So if you want to do something right in your own neighborhood and in your own community, we have membership opportunities as well. So we've got a wide variety. If you just want to click off your cell phone or take a quick course to help yourself in your professional development, or you want to engage more deeply through the Equity Network or through our membership, that would be terrific.
Awesome. And there were a few questions that we didn't get time to get to. Is it okay if they submit them maybe through your email, salary@aauw.org?
Do it that way, and I can even go through, well, no, I won't have time to go through all of those, but yes, they definitely can submit them through our salary at AAUW.org, and I'll make sure and personally answer them.
Perfect. I'm going to drop that in the chat too for folks. And thank you, Kimberly. I'll say thank you right now because we're going to pop that poll up and just take a few minutes. It's only 4 questions, folks, so please, it'll help us get some feedback on this webinar and future topics, and stay in touch. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll just launch that poll, and have a great afternoon, everybody.